boy, here we go again. Let's talk about the DLC and all the things it tells us, as well as what it means and what it may not mean. I'll be honest, I'm not super happy with the outcome of the DLC and what it sort of revealed, but it was nevertheless very, very good to play. We'll talk through this first, so obviously spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't experienced the end of the DLC. Or indeed, any of the DLC. Leave now while you have the chance. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Alright, now that that's over with, let's go over the basic plot of the DLC from start to finish briefly. First, the runaway kid wakes up in one of the nurseries where the kids sleep and begins his escape attempt, briefly aided by a girl in a dress whose flashlight he acquires when this girl is probably eaten by leeches. He must make his way through the depths, a flooded, possibly once prison, possibly once ship's brig, that is now the lair of the forgotten Granny. After being harried by this maybe once human creature, he manages to electrocute her to death by pushing a television into the water that she's in, and then escaping into the engine room and its surrounding areas of the great vessel, where he finds that the ship is being fed its supply of fuel by the Nomes, these tiny humanoids with what appears to be limited intelligence and clumsy bodies, who almost mindlessly feed coal to the gaping mouth of the furnace to keep the ship functioning. While in the process of gathering all the stray gnomes he can find to help feed the furnace more coal in order to activate the elevator-like device in the background so that he can continue, he is chased by the janitor through all kinds of dark places that give little indications about what the janitor might be all about, culminating in the full restoration of the Maw's engines, which allows him to escape into a hidden place where a bunch of gnomes are gathered, and the fire from the furnace in that room reveals they have shadows of children, not gnomes. The runaway kid leaves that room to find himself on top of the elevator in which the lady rides. Finding himself now in the upper floors of the Maw, he must sneak around the lady's quarters and gather up some dolls that open up a door through which the kid tries to escape, only to accidentally stumble across the lady looking at her reflection in a mirror without her mask. The reflection of the lady is distorted and erratic, but as soon as the lady discovers the runaway kid spying on her, she starts her assault on him just like she does against Six later, using her sort of levitation, phasing, and telekinesis-type abilities, culminating in her catching him just as he's close to escaping from her, and what we suppose is using her magic to turn him into a gnome. Now, in the clumsy body of one of these diminutive creatures, he stumbles through chutes and holes until he finds himself in the company of a few other gnomes, in a familiar room with a single sausage lying on the floor. And roll credits, to where we get a special little extra scene at the end. Now, we have a lot to talk about, so this video will probably be a multiple-part series, culminating in an Alpha Dreadful-style review of the game and DLC. God, I haven't done one of those in like an eon. Well, let's get down to the first thing to talk about, the gnomes. In a previous video, I asserted that believing the first thing that looks the most obvious is not always the best idea, and presented an alternative theory as to what could be a possible explanation of the gnomes having the shadows of kids in that room. While I never asserted that this theory was the only true theory to be believed and held up, I did assert that believing the easy thing is boring. Well, I stand by this statement still, perhaps even now more than before. So here's the skinny. We watch the runaway kid get caught by the lady in that one room, and then the screen goes dark for a second, and then we control a gnome, who's standing on the clothing and shackle of the runaway kid. It bumbles deeper into the bits of the Maw, back down into the dining areas, where the guests continue to stuff their faces. Therefore, everyone will say right off the bat that because of this scene, every gnome on the Maw was created this same way, that all of the gnomes are kids, and that the lady created all of them from the beginning. In fact, the comments on my last video about the gnomes demonstrate this easy way out viewpoint perfectly, with comments like these. Well, here's where my first bit of problem comes in. From all we have of Tarzier's work up until now, we know that they're really good at putting together story elements that drive mystery and the feeling of uncertainty. We know that everything that they put in the game has been put there for a very specific reason, and we know that they don't like to reveal outright any pieces of the underlying lore of the world. In fact, the only thing that they've outright confirmed as a result of being asked the question is that Six and the lady are not related, despite the popular theories that this could be the case. So, for this ending, this big reveal, to be as simple as this doesn't feel like it's characteristic of Tarsier. That being said, it definitely is the easiest way to put the pieces together. We see how one gnome gets made, therefore all gnomes must come about the same way. It's just so off the cuff that it seems like it's too easy of an explanation, so let me outline some of the problems with this theory that all gnomes are kids. First, people will point to the shadows of the gnomes in the furnace room being proof that they're all kids, but why do their shadows only show up that way in that room? In no other part of the game do their shadows look anything other than gnome. Maybe it's the fire? Well, no, there's no indications of a change in shadow in front of the big furnace either, and if we discount that that's because the lighting in the big furnace room is too bright, then what about when it's being cast from the lanterns that are all over the place? That doesn't change them either. Maybe it's not the fire that does it, but the specific gnomes whose shadows are being cast. Yes, the shadows in that room are weird and different. Yes, they are the shadows for the models of the bread child and the flashlight girl. No, this alone does not prove that the gnomes were once kids, but it does provide some circumstantial evidence for that theory. Next, what people say is the smoking gun is the scene where the lady turns the runaway kid into a gnome. This is compelling evidence, but not for the theory that you might be thinking. What this tells us is that the lady has the capability to turn kids into gnomes. However, there's a ton of gnomes in the maw, and it takes what seems to be a great deal of effort and anger by the lady to transform the runaway kid into a gnome. So if we're to take this example as the standard by which a kid becomes a gnome, then it would occupy the lady for long periods of time to transform multiple kids, and would take up a lot of energy and effort. I therefore posit that this method of making gnomes is untenable as a normal method of producing them. What I think happened, though, is the lady, angry that the runaway kid had seen her face, retaliated against him by chasing him down and turning him into what she views as a lesser creature, a gnome. The lady knows that the gnomes are unable to communicate in the same sense as other creatures like normal kids would be, and kind of wants no one to have the ability to talk about what they saw when they see her face. So since it would be not uncommon for the lady to see gnomes around, she chose that form both as punishment and ease of choice, even though she could just as easily have turned him into a rat, or a leech, or indeed anything else. Heck, since we've seen her turn someone into something, and we don't see any other limits of her powers, it is very well possible that the lady can just change things into other things. That makes her super OP, but it also opens the door to a lot of really ridiculous theories. So, we'll leave that one where it is right now. We don't know how long the process took since the screen blacked out, and we neither see the lady leave, nor the process by which the runaway kid becomes a gnome. To assume that it's an instantaneous process is plausible, but it's also equally plausible that the lady set the magic in motion and left, or that it took hours, or that it takes quite a much longer time than we saw. Either way, though, the point here is to assert that while the runaway kid was turned into a gnome by the lady, it's unlikely that all gnomes are created in this same way, and therefore possible that not all gnomes are kids. They may actually be a race of creatures unto their own, whereupon sometimes another creature is transformed into one. This, plus the shadows from the one room with the furnace in it, lead me to believe that while all of the other gnomes in the game are concerned with one of two things, that is, feeding the furnaces or hiding from the main character, the ones we meet in the hidden furnace room might be the ones that used to be kids and are still aware of what they used to be, and are using that room as a sort of safe place to despair about their previous existence. Now, obviously, the easiest thing to believe is that somehow the lady turns all the kids into gnomes, and that's how all the gnomes get there. However, there are too many holes to plug for that to be the case, at least in my opinion. Feel free, of course, to believe whatever you want. Theories of this nature are, by virtue of us not knowing everything, never really 100% sure about anything. But I like to give credit to Tarsier a little bit more than what I think just assuming that, oh, the lady makes all the gnomes is. Anyway, we have a lot more to talk about than just gnomes, though, so look for part 2 of the discussion of the DLC and the accompanying theories in the next few days. Thank you guys so much for coming and watching, I really appreciate it. Thank you in specific to my Patreon supporters this month. Keep on being as awesome as you guys already are. Look for the rest of the videos in the next little bit of the future. You know what to do with all the other buttons on the screen. There's the like button, you could click that. That would be super cool. If you aren't already subscribed, please also click that button. I will see you guys next time.